Thank you, Tracy, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about the Lucas Heights Resource Recovery Park project. So this is a conclusion of a number of years of work, and we thought it was an opportune time to bring others in the industry who haven't been following this project up to speed with the work that we've been doing. The benefits of this particular project: certainly it's about ensuring Sydney's waste disposal availability continues following the closure of the Eastern Creek landfill, which is imminent. It'll be June, July this year, which is a significant change to the waste infrastructure for Sydney. There was also the closure of the Belrose landfill in 2014 and the Spring Farm, or Jack Scully as it's sometimes known, landfill in 2016. Advantages of developing such a project that we have: certainly it's about reusing an existing asset, and that obviously reduces the environmental impact compared with a entirely new location. The reprofiling of the landfill produced better environmental outcomes. There's an opportunity there is ongoing jobs in the Sutherland Shire area, and opportunity for the creation of a number of construction jobs. There's a large parkland proposed at the end of this particular project, which will benefit the community. And in addition to that, there's a $100 million contribution to the Sutherland Shire Council through a voluntary planning agreement. This is SUE's continued contribution to the investment in essential waste management infrastructure in New South Wales. What's the project look like? It's expanding the landfill by 8.3 million cubic metres and extending the life of the landfill from 2025 to 2037. In addition to that, it's relocating and expanding the garden organics facility from 55,000 tonnes to 80,000 tonnes per annum. And it's an opportunity to invest in a 200,000 tonne per annum alternative waste treatment facility. Now, I'd like to thank Robbie for the introduction in the first presentation to show that there is a demand for these sorts of facilities, particularly in the Sydney area. And we now have approval to build such a facility should the opportunities arise. And finally, the project consists of building 149 hectares of parkland that will be returned to community use following landfill closure. Currently, the site's a putrescible waste landfill. Some of it's capped, some of it's operational. And in addition to that, we have the typical infrastructure: weighbridges, office, small vehicle drop-off and recycling area, garden organics area, and in addition to that, stormwater and leachate dams, and a landfill gas-to-power generation facility on site, which has 20 engines and 22 megawatt capacity of renewable energy creation. Something that's quite unique about this project is our active involvement with Sutherland Shire Council. Sutherland Shire Council was a joint applicant in this project, and that's due to the history of the site, which required them to be a joint applicant should any changes to the development application be done in the future. They were actively involved throughout the process, from the initial concepts through reviewing every document, every word, every page, every technical report, every EMP, and I'd like to thank Ian Drennan from Sutherland Shire Council for his contribution and efforts involved in this particular project. Australian Nuclear Science Technology Organisation, our landlord. So they're located obviously next to our facility, and 2/3 of the land which the facility sits on is owned by ANSTO. So we had the unique opportunity of working with local government as joint applicant, with the federal government as our landlord, and seeking approval from the state government. So you can just imagine that what that process might have entailed. The voluntary planning agreement, many development applications involve voluntary planning agreements. I think this one's pretty unique, and it was actually entered into the agreement with Sutherland Shire Council, and it involved a monetary contribution of $100 million over 15 years to Sutherland Shire Council for investment in community infrastructure, predominantly in the local area, but also throughout the Shire. A number of other environmental undertakings were committed to, particularly around use of best practice. I think what's probably a unique complaints review and management process, where we are speaking with and informing council and council laws of the things that are going on. And there's ongoing reporting and auditing requirements that we have committed to. The voluntary planning agreement also talks about the final landscaping, what it should look like, how it should be dealt with, and who should have access to the land. And finally, we've actually got it documents a number of the post-closure requirements that Suez will need to comply with, and the other parties for a minimum of 30 years post-closure. And finally, at the end of the operations, we have an obligation to transfer the Suez-owned land to Sutherland Shire Council as part of the creation of that of the parkland. It's been a journey, as all development processes are. And I think what was interesting, linking back to the first topic of this afternoon's presentation about a number of the gaps in the need for infrastructure. But infrastructure doesn't turn up tomorrow. Infrastructure takes time, takes planning, takes thinking, and ultimately, if you are successful, you then got an internal investment process to go through, and you've got a procurement process and a construction process. So if you're planning on very large waste infrastructure projects, it's a 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 year time frame from when you actually start thinking about it to when these things come online. So get that on your radar and make sure your politicians that are involved in it understand these challenges. So this particular project has initial concepts were developed in 2011, 2012. In 2014, we actually had agreement with Council to develop the EIS and advise the community of the project. And throughout 2015, GHD and Suez developed the EIS, and finally we submitted it to the department. And following that, there was the exhibition and consultation period, which David will talk about shortly. In 2016, we did the response to the submissions, and we had the Department of Planning were assessing our project. And I'm very pleased to say that in January 2017, we received approval for the project from the Planning and Assessment Commission. On that note, I'll hand over to David, and he'll talk through some of the other aspects of the particular project.
Right, yeah, thanks very much, Phil, and I'm just going to rotate this screen around a little bit so I can see what's going on. Yes, as Phil said, we had the unique opportunity to work with 3 levels of government and on this project, and Department of Planning and Environment was obviously set the rules, as it were, for carrying out the environmental assessment. The New South Wales EPA provide the regulatory framework for the project. The local community provide input on what they wanted to see out of the project, and also the things that they were most concerned about. And then ANSTO was the landlord, as Phil said, so they had particular issues that they wanted to make sure were addressed in the project, things like security, etc. So these projects, as Phil said, don't just come about, and particularly on the approvals side, it's very important to get the concept right in the first place. Otherwise, when you get into the approval process later on and the community and other stakeholders start asking questions about, so what's this going to mean and what's that going to mean? If you don't have those answers at that time, there's a huge loss of credibility. So it's very important to actually have everything well thought out. And so a very large amount of work went into producing a staged master plan for the site. And also because of the situation where we were looking at overtopping the existing landfill and basically removing existing cover material and then re-landfilling on top of that and then putting the final cap on, that's an approach that hadn't been done previously, probably at this scale. So it was very important to actually work out what the potential impacts might be of that operation and then the sheer logistics of it. So we were in a fortunate position. We worked very closely with Suez and their technical people who are very good, and their operational people who are excellent, and they knew exactly how they wanted to do this. And then we had on the other side, because it's a combined project, there was an alternative waste technology facility proposed. So we had overseas expertise from Suez providing design for that facility. And then the design had to be incorporated into the overall site design, and we had to look at access, we had to look at all sorts of different aspects. And then there was the need to move the existing composting facility from the eastern side of the site to the western side. And that sort of formed an overall sort of waste precinct on the western side. And when you obviously move something to the other side of the site, then that's when the cross-site access issues become important, because there's a great big sort of landfill in the middle. Anyway, we produced a very comprehensive environmental impact assessment. I think it runs over about 8 or 9 volumes, a good bedtime read for anybody. And incorporated in all that was the detailed environmental management plans. So those were developed very closely in conjunction with council, as Phil was acknowledged. Council made an enormous contribution to the whole project, not just in sort of a review capacity, but also providing a lot of intellectual input into the project. From members of the council team had been involved in previous approvals at Lucas Heights, so we had the benefit of that past experience as well to draw upon. So, we believe that the project in its current sort of proposition, provides minimal impact on the environment and the community. I'm going to probably run quickly through this because I've already covered most of it, but essentially multiple owners and occupants. One name that appears there is SICTA, Sydney International Clay Target Association. That's essentially a shooting range, and that's right adjacent to the site. So part of the challenge in the project was that in order to get enough land to put all these facilities on, it was necessary to take up a little bit of the land from the shooting association, which is currently leased by Suez to the shooting association. So it's a matter of a lease arrangement, but certainly there are some technical challenges with that kind of thing. And the whole complicated site history there, because there's actually an agreement that goes back many years to the Land Environment Court about the amount of tonnes per year that can go into the site and a whole lot of other things. So that whatever we were doing now would basically be undoing that agreement and producing a new agreement, which is essentially the voluntary planning agreement that Phil's talking about, plus some other sort of more formal, other formal agreements. So in terms of technology and that, I talked about, the whole thing is about stripping off the existing cover and then conserving that cover material so it can be then reused as part of the final capping. Scheduling the landfilling and closure activities. The idea that currently Suez is landfilling in the northern part of the site. That was going to be the last cells, but what this project does, it requires them to actually start again in the southern part of the site and then work their way towards the north, to try, I guess, and work away from the residential areas and, do areas which are more sort of beneficial in the first instance. So a complete change of the sequencing of the site. I've talked about site access for those new facilities. And then there was, at some point, a look at whether there should be another entrance to the site. And the road on the western side is actually an RMS road, 100 kilometres an hour. So there are certain complications with putting a new entrance there, which made that sort of unviable in the end. Internal roads, the Sutherland covered that. ART, the ART facility, which is the AWT facility, had to be fully enclosed. It's got biofilter, it's got scrubber, it's got a stack there to reduce the emissions. So even though the nearest neighbours are a few kilometres away, Suez attached high importance to minimising the odour impact of the project. We looked at creek ecology, macroinvertebrates, even biobanking offsets. So you would think on the existing site there isn't any sort of ecology issues, but there was material that ecology assessment has changed in the last sort of 20 years. A lot of species that weren't listed back then are listed now, so a whole look had to be made of that whole thing. And then basically you have to buy biobanking offsets, buy other land in other areas to offset the land that you're going to clear. So all that had to be sorted out as well. Suez proposed to use quad axle transfer trailers, to reduce the number of vehicles accessing the site. other than would have been if they used conventional trailers. Safety reviews had to be done of the existing intersection. And one of the key concerns of the local community was about litter. They associate waste operations with increased litter on the local roads. So Suez made some big commitments in terms of managing the litter associated with the site and contributing financially to the regional illegal dumping campaigns. So I tried to draw a little diagram to just show the sort of interactions between the various stakeholders. And so when one issue was if landfill staging, was associated with people like ANSTO and other, close receptors, I guess, try and minimise the odour impact during the development. So that had other implications for different things. The odour modelling had to be looked at, and then that affected something else, and that affected something else. So there was a lot of interactions between various things on the project. The community engagement process was quite detailed, a number of community reference group meetings, a dedicated website, social media, information flyers, everything that one should do was done completely thoroughly, and even site tours for the local people, and there were 13 site tours and 366 people visited the site. So people had lived nearby for years and never knew what was going on there. So this is my sort of final slide, some of the innovations I guess we've come to realise from the project. It was certainly an experience to work closely with a council rather than sort of bringing them in, giving them only a small look at the project. This was, they were thoroughly involved in this project and they had a huge contribution. There was a big contribution from the Department of Planning and the EPA, and that sort of helped shape the project. One of the things that we did was, in part of the early part of the project, a kind of a pre-feasibility assessment of the odour impacts as a go, no-go exercise really for the project. And when they showed that it was a go, then that's when preparation of the EIS started in earnest. We used real data for modelling odour, so there was an extensive odour sampling program on the existing landfill and also a composting facility, rather than just relying on past data from past EISs, which tends to be what people do sometimes. And then we tried to develop all the design details to the greatest extent that we could in the time frame to enable the impact assessment to be done as quickly and accurately as possible. And the other sort of obvious innovation is funding for community facilities and litter management measures, which was a big community benefit. And that is the end of this presentation. Thank you.